Yeah. So uh, I actually prepared like in previous years since I'm one of the oldest tutors in this workshop. Something which I think might be helpful for students in order to see another examples to face some interesting concepts, ideas, and so on. Yesterday, we had actually two very interesting lectures, one in a very big scale in Italy, in Tunisia, and the second one even dealing with a small scale. And it was also a lot of narrative, which was very interesting. So topics like palimpsest, topics like territory, and so on and so on. I also include some of these narratives in my overview, and I call it metamorphosis because I think the cities are actually in a status of permanently changing, and this is nothing is really for forever. So it's always this omnia mutantur nihil internit. So like Ovid, Roman poet said, who was actually describing Pythagoras' theory and wrote a book about this permanent changes in an entire universe. Everything is in flux. Everything is fluid. Of course, this constantly motion is somehow interesting and not easy to catch up the real moment. But we are living in a very special, unique time every single second, and I think that the generations to come have to deal with this problem, with this issue in probably in a new way. Obviously, the generation before did a lot of also damage, I have to say, especially in terms of ecological sense. So we are all facing all these problems from ecological problems to the climate shift, and obviously the recipes we had before are not working anymore. So we have to change something, and this is already landed in most of the schools of architecture worldwide. Also, maybe just for the students who are not so familiar with this topic, as a metamorphosis actually is derived from the Greek word metamorphosis, also, which means transformation, and this permanently transformation is somehow occurring in not only biology, geology, mythology, but also the architecture as well. The roots are in the 19th century, from coming from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who was the first one making this metamorphosis topic again, kind of interesting for the other ones, and of course reminding us on even Aristoteles, who already showed the transformation of a butterfly. So mainly things is coming actually from biology, of the changing of the shape of life and so on. But if we want, we can of course speak about something like a metamorphosis of the cities, which describes the process of change and transformation of urban structure and function over time. And then, if we go deeper into it, we can let's say see there are some interesting processes ongoing, like a change in urban structure, a change in urban functions, and of course, it's a very dynamic process we have to be aware of. So, change in urban structure, I think it's very interesting because the physical shape of the city is ongoing, so is permanently under change. It's always changing its shape, shrinking or growing. So we are actually facing the long period of permanently growth. But obviously, there are some other examples we can follow. There are shrinking cities as well, and so on. And then, of course, the change in the functions. So we will see in the pictures which are going to follow that a lot of these functions are actually changed with the time, that they always actually change their functions. But so especially in this acceleration of a time, we are facing, all of us, from 19th century to nowadays. It is going more quickly and more quickly from year to year, from decade to decade. So I chose some examples of urban metamorphosis, like examples from industrial to service, industrial to cultural and leisure activities, Because somehow I'm following this process of changing, especially the let's say the cities which are on the big rivers or big so lakes, big water, like a sea. Doesn't matter if it's a Mediterranean or North Sea or even Chinese or Korean cities, that they all somehow have something in common. As their changes are somehow very similar. That this kind of classical industrial, let's say, part of living we used to have in the 19th and 20th century somehow is shrinking and disappearing more and more, and making space for other facilities which are going into these things. So we can, and this is probably my tip for the students, think about how to infill this development, the construction. How can we create more living space through the new constructions? How can we, let's say, work and build climate due to the climate changes? How can we prevent catastrophes and all these things which are so became quite a new normal in the new time we are all facing. So this is, I think, a very interesting topic in every sense. So I would start with this beautiful painting by Gerhard Richter, so Venice, also this edge between the water and the continent. So I think the water is somehow sort of medium. Many architects are afraid of because they don't know how to. They know how to swim, but they don't know how to act in this medium. And I think it's very important to them to learn how to create this edge, how to define this edge, how to make something which is as rich in offer as a, let's say, common ground that they used to work with. So in images like this, it's a very visible that on the one side, the right side, we can see this huge urban fabric, which is what was made, planned, realized, and just a few things in the water, because sometimes it's a huge kind of barrier, also fear of these things. I mean, fear sometimes with a good reason, but there are also, let's say, policies, and there are possibilities, also construction policy possibilities to to change these things. And then I would say that students also have to consider this sentence I borrowed from Kevin Lynch, so 1960, the image of the cities, where he describing this difference between the image of the city, the citizens, and the tenants of the houses have about their own city, and the one people have in a very short contact with the cities. Let's call them tourists who are coming to spend just a short time. As the expectations and the visualization of the surrounding spaces is totally different one. And somehow how to combine these two, how to fit as a, we know how important the fact is of tourism playing in Sardinia generally, and so on. So this is a something which is not only, let's say, close affecting Mediterranean cities, but also actually all cities around the world, even Vienna, because Vienna is laying on a big river called Danube. So, so here is even blue, like this beautiful walls. Name also changed its shape in the last several hundred years rapidly. So here in this historic maps, you can see how small was the medieval town with some villages around them, and huge alluvial area. So which was like a delta of a Danube is just floating behind the city. So if you are speaking about the changing the shape, this transformation of metamorphosis, as somebody who would nowadays come to Vienna would either recognize the city nor the river, and especially this huge area in the river, which is partly nowadays also national park and saved, played a very important role as a positive and negative. Was a flooding area, which is always affecting and actually dangerous for the city. On the other hand, saved lives for the Austrian army when the Napoleon invade Vienna. So it's a very ambitious as a correlations to these things. But let's compare it to the situation we have nowadays. There is a regulated channel who is going there are pictures from 19th century, of course, going through the or somehow behind the city, and then we have something we called Old Danube and the Viennese Channel, who is going and somehow tangential to the old city center. So if you compare this picture with the previous one, you would hardly recognize the same rivers. So this is something which is possible to do in a big scale, of course, with a huge amount of money. But even this kind of changes are possible. And I want to remind you that the rivers and seas, they were the highways and important places for all kind of traffic of the goods, for trade, even for making wars. Also here you see the Belgrade. It's several hundred kilometers towards south, where the ships for about 45 to 55 meter long, 9 meter wide, actually. Driving along the Danube. So it was actually the most important core of the European, especially, but also in the Chinese. If you think on this Emperor's Channel, which is going from Hangzhou to Beijing, so it was just a heart of the every single nation. And then in this long period of transformation, you see the first still a medieval city with this green belt around, which was actually transformed into what we call now Ringstraße, one of the most famous city roads and promenaden in worldwide, where the all most important buildings of the state of Austria, so including parliament and universities and so on, around this area. So these transformations are not happening overnight. So they are, of course, caused by different sources, and we have to be just aware, and it's always a kind of cause. In the 19th century, the cities realized that they don't have any kind of fear, so that the city wall was not protecting anybody. So in this very moment, not only Vienna but many cities somehow expand and use this area, which was so you can find it in many examples. One of my favorite topics is also topic of common space, urban commons, and so on. David Harvey also extended this narrative even to the, let's say, political spaces. So in Europe, we have the statement that without public space there is no democracy. So this is the begin and death of the whole democratic process. So that's why it's a very important that people are still in use, still owning these places, like they own it in Syntagma Square in Athens, in Tahrir Square in Cairo, in Kiev, and elsewhere. So the streets are supposed to be still public space. Why I'm asking and saying this? Because it's not always somehow normal. You have examples like Sony Plaza in Berlin, which is actually private-owned public space, so with very strict regulated, let's say, regulations. Who is so able to enter and use this space, and who's not? This is some kind of a, let's say, negative process we are somehow trying to to abandon with our planning. Yeah. And then, of course, there are metamorphoses of different ways. So, for example, Cristo, who put Monte Isola, as a Rocca di Monte Isola, as in 2016, in a sort of artificial space, which is both a public space and piece of art. In Thailand, people occupied the water, actually turning into the beautiful, huge market of all kind of goods, several days in the week. And if you would like somehow to think about, let's say, systematic of all these things, so Lefebvre, describing even this kind of globalization, something like a worldwide social space. This is something we are sharing this all this information nowadays. But there are some, let's say, historical routes we can always see because they're extremely interesting, like Allemansräten, the old actually habit in the northern of Europe, that in the winter you can just go through all areas, doesn't matter whom this area belongs. So this kind of enabling people to share this commons is extremely important. Yeah? And then if I can somehow list these things, I put public spaces, public squares, beaches, collective space, privately owned public space, semi-public space. This is some kind of help for students' narrative. And of course, there are some commons which are material and immaterial. So immaterial would be, let's say, a system of education, public, I don't know, radio, television, music, art, design, many things which are as important as, let's say, physical things like sharing of fissures, areas, sharing of water, sharing of sun, of healthy surroundings, and so on. So that's why, even so something is just a beach with let's say, present for this public space, especially in the cities, so in inside Mediterranean. And Peter Barnes warning us as well. He said they're all gifts and they're all, so we borrow them. They are not. We are not owning them. We have to take care about them, and we have to give it to the next generation. Maybe not in the same shape, but if possible, in a better shape. Yeah, because I think this is somehow also an important element. And then, of course, there is a. We are living now in a time where the cities became maybe more important than the countries behind them. So the cities are somehow like in a medieval or time, or even in Greece, as very important hubs who have their own kind of logic of development. And so that's why the cities are talking extremely intensively to each other, and somehow sharing a lot of, let's say, ideas, or problems like impact of globalization, recovering of historic memory, urban periphery, privatization, security, blah, 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 architectural formal austerity, formal autonomy, and so on. So the problems are somehow getting really global. So we can really compare them very easily, and you will find them in probably all over the world in a similar shape. And somehow this is a nice picture of the Hamburg, so from 50s. It's interesting to see that there's at least as a European new agenda is somehow the contemporary urban model must be dense and then a compact city, that then collective nature and political potential is important. Places should be public and urban. Um, Creation of public spaces, urban surgery, which is somehow we have to be aware of the damage we are always doing with some of the projects. So it's very important to create the community, to be concerned about the social aspect of architecture whenever we are dealing with these things. So I now going to start with some examples, which are examples of metamorphosis of nature, of water, of a traffic system, climate, and culture. Beginning actually with the city of Busan, which is we will see as a somehow not isolated example of what we are seeing in many harbor cities all around the world. It was a just a place for the goods, so they occupy the best part of the city, the safe harbor, and somehow it became as a certain moment where they going out with this all these harbor facilities, like it happened in Genoa, like it happened in Hamburg, like it happened in Rotterdam, like it happened in Dublin and many other places, and somehow culture is filling this gap. And in the same time, the image of the city, the concept of the city is changing rapidly. So you see now there's a symbol of culture as a new opera in the middle of the city of Busan versus this kind of let's say historical uh, harbor and fish harbor, which is still there, but somehow going to be pushed more and more on the side. We have the biggest probably inner city project realized in Europe in the last 2 decades in Hamburg, so with Hafen City, where the old facilities and goods somehow were replaced with the city. And this is interesting what kind of city it is. So the Hamburg is actually not the newest planning, but still somehow was very much concerned to put a mixture of culture, of housing, of offices, of working places, of tourist attractions and so on. So it's very hard. So they also started with a big Hamburg opera designed by Herzog Demeron. Sorry, but somehow the housing is very necessary because if you don't have people who are living there, nobody's really taking care. So it's a totally different things. What they somehow trying to avoid is a destiny of the many American downtowns, where the downtown somehow is empty zone in the evening and just a very livable place up to the 5 or 6 in the afternoon, and then nobody's there anymore. As this kind of things was as a planned not to happen in Hamburg, and also planned not to happen in city of Dublin, where the Grafton architects is a famous Irish as a couple of architects who made a big career in the last several years, also somehow trying to reinvent the huge Dublin harbor, which was somehow the mouth of the whole Ireland. So it was the very much like a Liverpool in England. You have as a city which is extremely important in connection to US and to all other countries. So actually before the flying and airports, this harbor was the heart of the city. Also, the one of the biggest, let's say, places where you can find a job, because there are thousands of hundreds of thousands of people work actually something with the shipping, with the goods, with the trade, and so on, sooner or later. And then we have a interesting phenomena which is very visible, for example, in the city of Helsinki. The whole north of Europe is also facing more and more climate change. So I remember when I was young, like our students, that the biggest heroes in Helsinki, city of Helsinki, was this big ice crash ships who somehow made the routes through the North Sea and so on. Nowadays, they are almost not existing anymore. They're staying there just for the actually for the tourists, and have hardly something to do. So this whole harbor of the Helsinki actually piece by piece turned into the, let's say, cultural area. It's a new city center. So ice is coming maybe just for a few days in the winter, in the last years. But around there are one museum after another is growing. It was also idea to make interesting here, like a Moreau Kusunoki office based in Paris, another Guggenheim, let's say, narrative, but somehow they failed because the city of Helsinki didn't want to support them. Instead of this museum, it's already ongoing a second competition, which is going to give the best solution for the new museum of architecture, which is going to be built on the same place in Helsinki. But also around there are more and more hotels. There are more and more, let's say, tourist facilities. So the whole harbor somehow changing, transforming into the into the new public space. We see that the former public space and behind the cathedral in the back. But this is for many years already, let's say, too small for this amount of the people and somehow the new way of living in Helsinki. There is something which I would also like to remind the students that the facade, the city major facade, was always the one from the water. Also, the cities doesn't have, let's say, facade also made from the backside, but always from the water, from the river or from the sea. So this is the case also in Stockholm, in the small island called Skeppsholmen, which was also first a trade, then kind of just a lager space for the goods and so on, turned piece by piece, so step by step, into the very interesting island full of museums, including the famous one by Rafael Moneo. And the whole island turned into the kind of cultural, let's say, island for itself. So it's a very, very interesting project, and especially this cluster of museums, not only museums, but also cultural facilities, is always, I think, welcome. Because if you have just one facility, people are going or not. But if you have several one, they always have a choice. And it's also well known that when they come to one of them, they're going to show up in the second one. And so the whole, let's say, heart of the city of Stockholm again became actually the culture. So this is in a very, very city center. As you can also enter this island either with a car or come with a ship, small ship, and motoscafo, also all kind of also combinations impossible. I remember when I was for the first time in 2000, I think in two, in city of Shenzhen, also in place called Sheko. This was one of the boroughs where the industrial, let's say, revolution and industrial wonder of China start. It was still kind of small, yeah, I wouldn't say village, but small area with the major buildings from made in 80s and so on. It's totally new everything, but in a small scale. Nowadays, it's a huge city. It's a very powerful city with, I don't know, almost 30 million people living there. So totally changed in incredible time. So this is a speed which was really unique. I think still unique worldwide. Yeah. Also, but I want to show you that scale no matter. Also, we have interesting example in the city of Piran, where the Piazza Tartini, as a Tartini Square, as a famous musician, was made by Boris Podreka. The former harbor was filled with the material, made a new sort of piazza, and this piazza was then somehow designed by architects, giving totally changing the let's say original plan of the city, the logic of the harbor, and so on, expanding the harbor to the outskirts, making much bigger one things. But the small medieval harbor was filled and creating now a public space for everyone. In totally different scale, we have examples of Rotterdam, Kop van Zijde, where the architects from beginning of 90s already, also it was somehow as a plane for the who is who of architects from Netherlands, from OMA, Remco Koolhaas up to the you name it. So many of them built and still building on this huge artificial parts in the middle of the city. So they also replaced the facilities of the harbor. They replaced the facilities of the storages and put something which is, I think this sketch is somehow very optimistic, trying to show all this, let's say, combining of the housing and living and cultural facility, high and low, dense and low dense, bridges, infrastructure. So this kind of also it's vivid like a city should be or could be, also especially the such a very special city of city of Rotterdam, the biggest harbor in Europe, the best working harbor in Europe still, where I think 80% of all goods coming to Europe are still coming through the mouth of Kop van Zijl, also not Kop van Zijl, but Rotterdam harbor and partly Hamburg. All others are like a small harbors um, compares to them. And you see as a here as the first try somehow to reshape the shape of the harbors, to reshape and strategically positioning of the cultural facilities of housing on things. It's a very complex process, including green areas. For example, you see here as this longitudinal parks and also this lungomare, also this or lungofiume, better gesagt, also in this case, also long areas, also along the river where people can find a shadow in under the trees and so on. And then you have, of course, this fragmentary so-called big iconic buildings like a piers in Yokohama, which was one of the major objects of the 90s, where the people wanted somehow to reshape totally this kind of coming into the Japan and this beautiful artificial landscape and things. But somehow it's also, I think, a relict of this time when we spoke about Bilbao effects, when we hope that one single object can somehow change the future of the city or somehow the I don't know the shape of the city, the image of the city, and so on. So this is about iconic buildings. But then you have a lot of, let's say, small interventions, which are also very interesting. We can see the metamorphosis into the green, yeah, more green parks. Like, for example, Elche in Spain, where Spain is generally suffering a lack of water, also for the farming. Also, they're using actually too much water for the farming, and of course, due to the climate change, also evaporated water. This problem is growing from year to year. So what left from one's river going to this place is actually just a small creek now, but somehow they prevent this area and turn into the beautiful green park, which is as interesting as this water channel before, giving people not only, let's say, place for public activities, but also giving them a necessary shadow as well, and somehow climate adopted, let's say, landscape architecture inside the city center. We have a similar example in city of Utrecht, also in Holland, Netherlands, where one of the former highways was turned back into the previously channel, because it was a channel as a from many cities, also in probably in Busan and Palermo. Some of the streets still have names of the former rivers that were dried out or creeks and then filled and then became suddenly streets. Yeah, as this history of the things is very long. So in this case, they really put back, this is a so-called renaturalization, as something back to nature, very complex but very interesting project of, let's say, filling the highway with the water and giving a back a beautiful park in the middle of the city. In bigger scale, also Carlos Ferrater and also Playa de Pondiente Esplanade. Also for some reason, the citizens of Barcelona are spending 60% of their time outside, outdoor. And I think this topic of outdoor is a very Mediterranean, very familiar to many Mediterranean cities. So I think also students have to consider this idea that people not spending so much time in their own homes, but the public space, the shared space is extremely important. So, what Carlos Ferreter said, okay, we can have a small, narrow line between the two media, the water or playa in as a plage as or the beach in the sense and the city, but we can also expand it. So how about having like a space in between? So this is what he did. So he just expand this line and put it on several levels. So we have like a almost three levels in heights, including wardrobes and all facilities for the beach, but at the same time providing necessary corners for yeah, also having rest, enjoying, and so on for the cities. And you see, it's somehow very smart combining the heights between these two levels. Small but poetic project was made in Zara in Croatia by Niko Basic, also who created actually sound out of this of the stairs coming into the Adriatic Sea, and each time when the wind blows, pushing the water into these things, they're working like organs, so they're as a actually instrument. You can hear and enjoy and be aware of the so it's sometimes like a wind, so something you can't see, but if you have a sailing boat you will see the wind, so and his strength very well, or if you have umbrella, the same thing, yeah. So it's a beautiful poetic project in let's say in a smaller scale, but this project is also standing in front of the university, so that means that the public space was as a previously as a meant to be just a let's say a space for the students for this kind of college area, but somehow turned into one of the most let's say popular places where the all citizens of Zara of Zadar are coming together, enjoying almost every day. Sometimes there are not really nice places, but I think that the fantasy of architects is asked, questioned, and then they can do sometimes very interesting things. So there's a huge surface of the place under the highway in Zaanstad, in again Netherlands, and in this let's say place which was nobody's place, they created a kind of longitudinal park full of facilities for skating, for swimming, for rowing, for you name it. This is like a new, even covered. I mean, probably you know how often it's raining in Netherlands. It's this is not the Mediterranean area, so it's sometimes you're very well protected in such areas, and you have a roof somehow for free, and then of course with these interventions became something different than the scary sometimes dangerous areas. We know all about the stories, so it's not always pleasant or yeah, even safe to be or to go in such areas. You see, this is some of them places are really like a sport facilities. Others are covered like a living room. The third one really bicycles and so on. The biggest inner city harbor in Europe is a port of Marseille, and famous landscape designer Michel Desvignes, who is also a professor in Harvard and so on, also together with other, also with actually City and many other architects who built later on famous things, nota bene this museum by Ricciotti and so on. Also, this is something which was somehow abandoned by the city, but now became a new city center. Not only did this covered things, I think it's a Norman Foster who was built. But the huge as a lungomare, which is going around this harbor, you can even have possibility to enter a bit to see the people like to walk between the boats and see them and compare them and so on. But this is not about the major problem was here how to abandon the huge number of the thousands of cars. So there are several garages who somehow covering this problem and now became a huge zone which is very interesting to go by walk and became one of the most favorite places where the people from Marseille coming and organizing all kind of events including big concerts, big events in a summer in a very city center, of course. Yeah. You all remember the Paris Olympic Games last year. I mean, it started actually many years ago, but there are actually two phases of this regulation of the river of Seine, as the one who started 2006, and the second phase, so later on, who was somehow almost, let's say, finished for the Olympic Games. So. Very similar like in city of Vienna, you will see some examples later on. They also decided to turn these sides of the river into the as a beaches or just a public space for walking, for having a rest, for all kind of process you can find in a public space. And this is the second phase where people are still somehow complaining about the quality of water, but they're doing year for year better and better. And this phase number two actually introducing the swimming in a Seine, something which nobody in Paris dare to think it's going to be ever possible again. Also because to get the clean water you have to deal with a lot of problems of the huge city, but somehow they succeed partly and it's really going better and better. And for example, you can see this beautiful swimming pools in the middle of the Paris as this looks like a Riviera, so pictures hardly imagined in the years before. We have a similar thing in the city of Copenhagen with the big GDS. Also planned this many years before, actually also this wooden floating, let's say facilities which turning this channels into something like a swimming pool, and then partly you have real swimming pools. You can purify the water, and then partly there are like so water of the channel. Yesterday we had contact with this narrative of palimpsest, which is actually this collage, so somehow vertical, layered, the collage of culture, the collage of public space. It's cities are actually very complex, and you can hardly somehow isolate just one function. So this huge complexity of the city was included and somehow major topic of the project made by Topotec and big architects in Copenhagen again, as a very longitudinal object in the middle of the former industrial and housing zone on the edge of the city center, which was turned into the three different areas: the red, green, and black. And then you have different atmospheres with a huge number of elements. As a very interesting topic here was somehow so they include elements of all immigrants who came to Copenhagen. Some of their, let's say, cultural goods was sent either by the states itself, or they brought them by themselves from the palms, from Dubai till you name it, all other so possible signs and things from US, from North and South America, Italy, and so on and so on. So it's a very interesting, very longitudinal, very thin but very long object. So it's also maybe example of that you don't have to have fear of the shape. So it could be something which is very longitudinal. So the coastal areas is always somehow like this. So and it's possible to do many things. I think I don't need to describe these pictures very much, but you can see this so all every few hundred meters is a different kind of atmosphere, different elements of things providing, let's say, a flair of, let's say, Arabic city or Italian one or French one or American one, and so on and so on. So it's a really very interesting and very popular space, and showing actually that the public space could be really reinterpreted in a many different ways. Also, Nomad, as a Spanish group, make it this way that they said, okay, we will count how many square meters we need from greenery, how many from things. Let's just make this small, like a pixel kind of of shape, where we have always again sort of atmosphere of a living room, but all in all it's a kind of mixture. Like a vivid picture of, you can hardly, it's like a pointillism in a painting, as though somehow you have to go back to see as though in a bigger scale what is actually around. So they just divide, so they melted park and public space into the one, but through these divisions of the small things that they gave this place totally different atmosphere. One of the so-called big objects, so we can come again, remind us on Bilbao, is actually this huge roof designed by architect Mayer in Sevilla, which is providing actually one of the most precious things in you can have in a city of south of Spain, and this is shadow. Yeah, this is probably the most important thing, because everyone is somehow looking after shadow to spend some time and so on. Beside all these vistas and these beautiful views you can enjoy from the top of this object. And then there is a, something we already saw, as a city of Oslo, who was actually poor village, kind of, not even a city, as a for the fishermen's, turn into the glamorous, actually center of culture, building one museum after another. And the opera was like a very first one, who is really replacing the fish factory on this very place, was a fish factory, and giving a kick for the new image they wanted to create for the city. They didn't want to be part of 19th century, but somehow the part of the future, and somehow succeed in their things. Interventions shouldn't be very big scale. Also, this is the example of RCR, architects in Spain, who just fill one small gap in a very dense city, La Lira in Ripoli, and create a sort of loggia and the new city entrance, together with this beautiful small pedestrian bridge entering the city. So new things. Between the houses, you can also create sort of public space, which could be something, yeah, different than things, as you don't have necessary to make and create plaza every time it's possible. Of course, depends on the facilities and content of the buildings you have right and left. But this is, for example, one very interesting example in Tallinn in Estonia. And one of the most photographed, so new plazas, where this play with the water in city of Tirana. Also